Hey everyone, Sean Waldman with Secure Cyber Defense, and welcome to episode 3 of CS Cyber. I'm Sean.
I'm Chad.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about third-party risk management. Seems to be a big topic in the news. We've had more organizations I've seen getting breached and then blaming a third party. So, Chad, why don't you just talk a little bit about like how that starts? Like, how does that work?
It happens a lot of different ways, right? Some organizations don't know what vendors they're actually using. They don't know how to secure those vendors. They don't know what those vendors are running, right? What applications, what underlying code is out there. So they don't really know a lot about their vendors.
Yeah, so it sounds like we could probably start with a lot of discovery.
Yeah.
Knowing your vendors a lot. I'll just go through a short list here just to kind of remind everybody about some recent third-party breaches. We've got American Express, Home Depot. These are some pretty common big names. Change Healthcare, which is more of a more recent one. Of course, AT&T, right? And then I also looked up and found Marriott, and that's just getting started, right? So a lot of these third parties outsource certain portions of what they do. Maybe it's a call center, a support center.
Well, those would be first parties. They outsource to third parties.
Yeah, that's correct. Right.
Yeah.
They are outsourcing to a third party.
Technicalities. We were talking about
Right, yeah.
Fourth parties, fifth parties.
I know. I didn't even know about fourth party, so I guess that's a whole other episode. Obviously a lot of these organizations create connections and data sharing, and that's where a lot of this goes wrong, right?
Right. I mean, so nobody's really doing it on their own anymore, right? Everyone is relying on someone else. It could be for cloud, for SaaS, for SASE, whatever it may be. So there's very few organizations that I would say are really doing it in-house, all of it, right? So people have access to your data, and it's really about what kind of access do they have, and how do we secure that, and how do we know that they're taking the same measures that we are to protect our data.
I think one of the big issues, too, I've seen is, or at least in talking with colleagues, has been this whole analogy of how much of a whole APIs are creating. So when a lot of these companies like American Express or Home Depot, these guys decide to enter into an agreement with a third party and they share information, one of the first things that they'll probably open up is an API, right? Maybe an API to Salesforce or something in order to get them the information that they need to fulfill that contract. And I'm just curious, for our listeners, if you want to make a comment on whatever platform you're on, I'm just curious how many people are really in tune to what their APIs, what APIs they have, and what data they're transmitting.
Yeah, I would say most people have no idea.
I would say
API and
this is probably what we'd hear.
Yeah, nobody knows
Nobody
what those
knows.
APIs are actually grabbing. There's probably a handful of people in the organization that are in tune to that.
Yeah, definitely. So, you and I have kind of done some homework on, what can we do about this?
Yeah.
Give me some actionable items. What do you have on your list? Like, what are some of the things that you can do to, kind of help people manage their third-party risk?
So really the first thing I have is just starting with vendor selection, right? And I think that starts with you and the organization. Like, what problem are you trying to solve, and what goals do you have for the vendor that you select, right? So
Definitely.
a lot of times people just hear a big name and they just go straight to that vendor, and they're just on board because everyone else is maybe on board.
Right.
But I think really vendor selection is kind of a personal thing to the organization, and select the right vendor, right? How do you vet that, and how do you select the right one?
Well, let's talk about vetting for a minute. Just some of the stuff that I've done. I've done some vetting of myself, not myself, but I've vetted. I don't know. Google yourself. That's a whole other experience. I've done some vetting as well, and Google, right? Certainly doing some research on the organization. So I've utilized Google to do research on vendors, and then I'll hit the news tab, right, to see how they've been in the news. Do they have some negative, do they have some negative news out there, that type of thing. I mean, definitely searching to see if an organization that you're trying to do business with or partner with, and really this could apply to anything, right? This could be mergers and acquisitions. That could be all kinds of stuff, right?
You're really doing just the OSINT, right? I mean,
yeah.
what are they about? Do they align with our values? Do they align with our goals?
Yeah. Are they entered into some legal battle, with somebody?
Right.
And then something that I've seen used very commonly is that security scorecard product that's out there. I don't know how valuable that is, but I think that's a data source, right?
Right. It gives you some sort of gauge,
Absolutely. What else do you have on your list?
Implement a vendor management policy or system, right? So there's actual systems out there that, depending on how many vendors you rely on, there's some organizations that they're outsourced almost everything, right? They're very slim internal. I see a lot of times where people may not really understand what vendors they have. They don't understand when contracts expire. They don't know what's in contracts, what's in scope, out of scope. So there's systems out there, much like, the systems that we use for compliance that track vendors, they track contracts, they pull out the details of the contract. So really implementing something like that and kind of a standard internal policy and procedure of what you go through when you're bringing a new vendor on board or you're vetting a vendor or anything like that.
Something I ran into on that side is we actually had a situation where a customer of ours, we were doing some dark web monitoring for them, and we got an alert that our particular customer that we were doing this work for, their information was seen in another breach, not related to them, right? And there was some discussion back and forth on, that particular customer asked that vendor, why didn't you notify us, that you had experienced? They were like, oh, yeah, we experienced a breach. And like, well, why didn't you notify us? And they said, well, there was nothing contractually obligating that.
That's really important. Right? Really important to have something in there.
Yeah. So making sure that that you really construct these contracts better so that you're including some wording maybe that says, hey, that you have to notify us within a reasonable amount of time or within 72 hours of a breach. So that particular customer was really upset about that, but the third party had a point. Like there was nothing mandating us to do that.
Yeah, that should just be in any contract that
you're
doing. So
definitely. What else you got?
Develop strong vendor relationships.
Yeah,
I think that's the most important thing. I mean, you have to have a personal relationship with your contact on the other side. They have to know what your strategic goals are and how they can align with them. I think that really just makes really for a better working experience on both sides, really.
I have a point there. I've told people, sometimes people ask me like, what is the vertical that you like the most operating in as a cybersecurity vendor? And do you know the answer? Have I told you this?
No.
Okay. I always choose the financial sector. And because I love the Securities and Exchange Commission, how they manage vendor or how they manage risk, cyber risk. Because one of the things that all of our financial customers have to do, and that they do, is they come here and they do physical due diligence at our office.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's amazing, right? Yeah. I do a lot of traveling to Israel. And one of the things I do is I perform physical vendor risk management and due diligence on our vendors that we use, no matter where you are, right?
Yeah.
U.S. vendors, out of country vendors. And I just think that's important. I think that's important to make a physical presence. I think that's important to sit and look at your vendor and have those conversations. Then you can evaluate their security controls. You can maybe ask some questions to employees that are around, right?
Yeah. I mean, so many people work like remotely. Everyone's spread out, right? So, I mean, when you're sitting across the table from someone, like you're a real person, right? Like you're really here. It's not just some email that you send off to nowhere. So
yeah, no, I totally agree. Well, I know you had 5.
I got ensure compliance and risk mitigation, right? So that's, have your checklist of due diligence things that you're checking off that, you may be on the hook for compliance wise. Make sure your vendors align with that and they're meeting the standards that you've set for yourself, right?
That is very interesting topic because we do a lot of work in the defense industrial base, and a lot of our listeners may be familiar with the term of prime and then subcontractor. And one of the things that I've seen as a missing hole is I believe that the prime needs to do proper due diligence on the subs. Now, that can get really complicated, right? So if you're a McDonnell Douglas, right, for example, if you're a large defense contractor and you've got thousands of subs, right, do you just develop a whole internal cybersecurity auditing firm to go audit your subs? And the answer is no, they don't do that, right? Because there's a lot of cost involved with that that's not able to be done from inside the defense contract. So what they end up doing is, sending out these surveys, basically, where they send a survey out and say,
the dreaded survey.
Yeah, I know, the ExoStar, is that what they're called or something? I think that's the ones I've seen. No offense, ExoStar, you're great people, but they send out these surveys and say, "Are you doing this? Are you doing this?" Right? That's the way they do it, because you can't tangibly do that much due diligence. But essentially, outside of the DoD conversation, that's kind of what you're talking about. So doing that proper due diligence to verify that they're in compliance.
Right. And there's a ton of forms on the internet that you can kind of pull down. You can make your own. There's a lot of examples out there.
Yeah, lots. I've got one. Cut ties with bad vendors. Well, that was obvious.
Oh yeah.
But how many people do we know that have bad vendors and have had bad vendors and have not been able to separate themselves from them, right? So
that takes a lot of planning, right? I mean, if you have a vendor that you rely on for a mission critical application or is really ingrained in your organization, think, managed service providers that are running maybe all of your stuff.
Right.
That's tough. You have to really plan for that, and that's not an overnight thing. So.
Yeah, no, not at all. I think the last one I had was, we laughed about it at the very beginning, but fourth party risk. And I was like, what the heck is that, right? So that's your third party that uses another party, right? So a sub to the sub.
Right. So for us, that would be our vendors, right? To our customers. So we're talking the Fortinets, the things that, we go to Israel, we went to Israel. You go to Israel more often and you meet with Fortinet, you meet with the EDR team.
Yep.
All of our other vendors in Israel that we do business with, you're meeting with them as well. So.
Well, I think I'd like to just end with I think it's really important that you identify and document your third parties for sure, right? Taking an inventory and saying who are our third parties first of all, and then I think not to overwhelm everybody because we went over a lot of stuff. But my recommendation, I'll let you chime in with your big ones. I think my last recommendation would be to really understand what data you're sharing with them.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. You have to know what they have access to, and it may not be data that you're sharing with. It may be data that you house that they have access to do whatever. So really knowing who can get into your house and who can walk around and look at your stuff is important. But for me, I think, really the strongest, the biggest one to me is strong relationships, right? I think business works on relationships, and that's just important to me. So
yeah, no, I totally agree. All right. Well, I think that wraps up this episode. I want to thank everybody. Thank you, Chad. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We'll be back for another episode next week. And for now, I'm Sean.
I'm Chad.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you.